So if anyone knows me personally, they should know that I'm a big fan of feel-good inspirational movies, Rocky being one of my absolute favourites. Our hero Rocky has just taken on a boxing match with one of the greatest pound-for-pound boxers in the world, Apollo Creed. Rocky, however, is the underdog going into this fight. He's an unknown boxer from a poor neighbourhood in Philadelphia. There's a scene in the movie where Rocky has to get up early for a cold morning run. You can see him get up at the crack of dawn in his cold-ass apartment. You can also see him drink a glass full of eggs, which is kind of grim. After not too long, he's outside, he's stretching, beginning his lonely morning run through the streets of Philadelphia. The reason why I love this scene is because of how it depicts the reality of doing something that's difficult. There's no cameras, there's no sound of applause from big crowds and audiences. It's just Rocky by himself. It can be very easy to avoid these moments, the ones where you're forced to face a fear of not being good enough, a fear of the unknown, etc. But sometimes we are the choices that we make, especially the hard ones. I'm going to give you a short story. When I was a teenager, I really wanted to get super lean, super ripped, so bad. So what I did, I ended up cutting out carbs from my diet, counting my calories, and there was even these cans of these vinegary beans that I would buy. They were already cooked, but I would open them up, have these beans, and to this day, the memory of this does make me feel sick. It's honest, I don't know what I was thinking. More recently though, as a boxer, I've had to usually cut 5 to 6 kgs in weight for my fights. Not that they're professional, they're white collar, but still it is something that is not an easy thing to do, is giving up the food that you love. For me, the food that I absolutely love the most, it has to be chocolate. Anything that's got chocolate in it, I love. You can't beat chocolate. It's so difficult to replace chocolate. But what's helped me in my time, it's been substituting it with something else. So whether that is apples, for instance, or any form of watermelon fruit, it just makes it easier to transition to something like that than go cold turkey and really feel the effects of not having that in your life anymore. So sometimes it's not about what you can cut out, but it's what you can change. It's what you can logistically get yourself to view in a different way. Yeah, many of the weight cuts I've done recently have been the result of that. It's been quite a cool little trick. And in the book, 80-20 principle, the main idea of the book is that 80% of the results come from 20% of the actions. For example, usually 80% of the profits in an organization come from 20% of the employees that actually work in the organization. Now, applying this to ourselves, it could be that 80% of the results in our own lives come from things that we do 20% of the time. Okay, so what does this mean? What am I talking about? Well, the idea is that sacrifice is a requirement. It's not an option. It's an absolute necessity. I think what a good exercise to do is to think about what is the 20% of things in your life that lead to most of your happiness, your financial stability, maybe even positive relationships, and what's the 80% that is stopping you from being where you want to be. And sometimes what this is something quite simple. It might be that you have a couple of friends too many. Maybe you overspend on the weekends. So figuring out where you're wasting your energy and where your 80% is being just, chucked out the window. And whatever it is, definitely figure it out. And this brings me on to my next point. How you act when no one's watching. Now, I think single-handedly, one of the most difficult things to do is to act when you're not feeling motivated or completely inspired. And this is something that I'm trying to coach myself out of believing. And this is that motivation is something that you have one day or one moment and then it's gone the next. Like how we can have good days and we can have bad days. We don't think motivation is something that we can consistently have. Like this is something I've tried to, understand and figure out for myself, especially since I've been training and having to get fit and all that sort of stuff. And it's how do you motivate yourself when you really don't want to fucking do it? Like, how would you do that? And now I'm going to bring up another awesome book, and this is The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. In this book, he mentioned that there are a couple habits called keystone habits. Now, keystone habits are pretty much the main anchor point for all of the other smaller habits in your life, all the positive ones as well. Now, you've probably heard the time we're creatures of habit, and what that means is we're more likely to stick to something the more regularly we attempt to do it. Understanding this, it makes it a lot easier to do the things we don't want to do if we know that it's going to get easier because our brains are going to accommodate that activity for ourselves. Like regardless if you want your brain to do that, it's going to start doing it. And sometimes what it takes is having a consistent action or routine that will give you that momentum. Applying this to myself, I find that I struggle with wanting to do 5K runs sometimes, and I procrastinate just being on Instagram, scrolling through the reels and all the videos and like social media stuff. And then I find that what helps me get motivated is just by putting my shorts on. And after that, putting my shoes on, tying my laces, and that prompts me to do is start stretching. And before I know it, I'm actually motivated to start running. And it's all because of this chain reaction of habits that force me into that mindset. And I think the most important thing is that your brain is always going to try and protect you from what is going to make you uncomfortable. So you've just got to find ways to trick it. And to finish off, how you act when people are watching. Now, I think it's fair to assume that most of us have some form of social desirability bias. Like we make decisions and choices based upon what others expect of us. Sometimes it might be a career path that your parents set out for you because they believe that's the right choice, and then you start believing that's the right thing. And for me, my parents had the expectation that I was going to be a journalist, and this was something that they picked up because I was actually very good at writing in school. It's always something that I've enjoyed, and I had this idea in my head for many years. So I went to university, I did placements at regional and national newspapers. I did a little bit of freelance journalism work and reporting. I even had a blog. But when I started fully working as a freelance journalist, I realized there was a mix up between what I wanted and what I thought I wanted. And I remember feeling really sad all the time. And I'll never forget that feeling. I felt so down. And this came when there was no one left to impress. There was no one left to win over. I was just disappointed with what I was doing. And I'd say nowadays, these type of discoveries can come more often than you think when you do things like journaling or self-reflection. And I think journaling might be more effective than talking to a mate sometimes, not all the time. And the reason why that is probably because if you're speaking to a mate, I do feel like part of you is somewhat biased when it comes down to talking with them. If you're journaling, there's no bias. You're going to be honest with yourself because why would you lie to yourself? And I think that if you speak to a mate, you can be a bit dishonest. You might not tell the whole truth. But what I do actually think this comes down to a little bit as well, especially for myself being a bloke and all, it's quite a taboo thing to talk about your feelings. And yeah, if you start focusing less on what you think you want and more on what you feel, there's weight to that when you're writing this down. So it's a really good step towards action. I can't recommend this enough. Anyway, guys, if you're new here, my name is Chris. I make content like this weekly. There's been a bit of a break in the upload schedule recently because I've just done a boxing match, but I'll talk about that at some point. Anyway, guys, if you like what you see here, comment, like, and subscribe, and I'm sure I'll see you in the next video. You take care. Bye-bye.